Nintendo is suing Switch emulator Yuzu for piracy reasons. So Nintendo suddenly announced that they are suing the developers behind Yuzu, the Nintendo Switch emulator for PC, citing over 1 million lost sales of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and more. While similar game company versus emulator developer court cases have ended in losses for the game companies, it's possible Nintendo has grounding for their claims regarding Yuzu's development making money off early access Patreon access. In particular, Nintendo noted that Yuzu's Patreon doubled in members during the launch of Tears of the Kingdom, while illegally uploaded copies of the game reached 1 million downloads. Tears of the Kingdom has sold over 20 million copies since launch. Nintendo also apparently claims that Yuzu's developers violated DMCA and copyright infringement. Nintendo alleges in the lawsuit that there is no lawful way to use Yuzu to play Nintendo Switch games, as the emulator requires the decrypting of the game's encryption, protection used so the games can only be used on genuine Switch hardware. It remains unclear why Nintendo hasn't acted on the folks behind the Yuzu emulator until now. The company previously filed copyright claims against other Switch emulator Skyline, which ultimately got canceled. It's possible the paid Android version of Yuzu got the ire of Nintendo in comparison. And because we waited a day to do the podcast, this news came out. Nintendo Switch emulator Yuzu is going to shut down in the lawsuit in the settlement with Nintendo. That didn't take long. Nearly a week after Nintendo has settled their lawsuit against the creator of Yuzu, nearly a week later, Nintendo has settled their lawsuit against the creators. The company behind Yuzu paying out $2.4 million to Nintendo. With the emulator effectively being shut down, the team's $30,000 a month Patreon will likely be shut down too. The proposed settlement will call out Yuzu as being primarily designed for the purpose of circumventing technological measures. As with any proposed settlement, it still requires the judge's approval. It still remains unclear why Nintendo hasn't acted on the folks behind the Yuzu emulator until now, as the emulator was available for a number of years, months after the Switch console itself launched. It's possible Yuzu is being targeted due to emulating current generation technology, alongside requiring the circumventing of each game's encryption. Previous arguments for the lawsuit noted that The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was downloaded over 1 million times before its official launch, and that Yuzu's Patreon, which they used for support to develop the emulator, doubled during that time. Nintendo has been known to aggressively protect their intellectual property and/or copyright. A notorious case with an alleged Switch hacker named Gary Bowser ended with the person imprisoned, though released now, and fined millions of dollars, which he's still paying out. And then there's an update here where the folks behind Yuzu posted a statement after the settlement became public saying, "Hello, users and Citra fans. We write today to inform you that Yuzu and Yuzu support of Citra are being discontinued effective immediately. Yuzu and its team have always been against piracy. Have you? We started the project in good faith, out of passion for Nintendo and its consoles and games, and were not intended to cause harm. But we see now that because our projects can circumvent Nintendo's technological protection measures and allow users to play games outside of authorized hardware, they have led to extensive piracy. In particular, we have been deeply disappointed when users have used our software to leak game content prior to its release and ruin the experience for legitimate purchasers and fans. We have come to the decision that we cannot continue to allow this to occur. Piracy was never our intention, and we believe that piracy of video games and on video game consoles should end. Effective today, we will be pulling our code repositories offline, discontinuing our Patreon accounts and Discord servers, and soon shutting down our websites. We hope our actions would be a small step towards ending piracy of the creator's work." I don't know why that just triggered in my head was that scene in The Happening when the old lady, I haven't even seen this movie, I've had this scene described to me. The old lady's like, "You're here to kill me, aren't you?" And like Mark Wahlberg's like, "No, of course not." Like it's just like real, but
what? No.
But instead, imagine it's the Nazis, and they're like, "You're here to kill Jews." What? No. What? We love the Jews. My fellow Germans, it has come to our attention that Jews were dying in our gas chambers, and we're putting an end to them effective immediately. Like it just seems like It's such a bizarre statement. Like, no, we've learned. It's come to our attention that people have been using our efforts to pirate. Oh no, that was not our intention. Anyway, so
Yeah, I guess we could go through this. They in their discords, there was some chats that got leaked that seemed to imply that they were not on their
Yuzu is
best
legal.
behavior.
We don't support illegal activities. Dumping your purchased games and system files from your Switch is legal. Downloading them is not.
So that's the official stance on legality of emulating, right?
From the
You're
bot.
supposed to dump your own
From
stuff.
the bot that waits for somebody to ask a question that includes the word download and says, whoa, Yuzu is legal, right? All of this is okay except for the thing you asked for, right? All right, so they said, Rodrigo, have you heard about the new Xenoblade? Me, I don't give a fuck about Xenoblade. Well, we have to download it. Okay, use the stash. How big is it? Just 14 gigs. Fucking 14 gigs? This will take a while.
So, my understanding is that's a staff member or someone who works on the code anyway. I don't know. Act like basically bragging that they're pirating the game. I don't know if that has anything to do with them getting sued. In theory, it would be a different lawsuit about them directly pirating games instead of leading to the piracy of games. But
it says here they got greedy and worked with a sketchy Nintendo Online clone and tried to implement online play as a Patreon exclusive feature. When they found out this was illegal, they removed it the same day they launched it. Right. So, can you give us the contact for your lawyer? Why? For reference. I'm sorry. Provide a book or article with citations and sources of information. I meant for what reference? It'd be nice to have something to reference this against. I am waiting on one more thing from my lawyer. That is the biggest and pretty much only hurdle left. Okay. You don't believe I actually have a lawyer? Like, I'm confused on why you need this info. Are you planning on litigating me in the near future? Nope, just for reference. Then sorry, but no. Anyway, this is an extremely long image we're not going to read.
Yeah, you don't. The rest of it's kind of not important.
Yeah.
But, yeah, they took down the online thing, so clearly they were trying to stay on the right side of legality, right? No one, I'm sure no one on the
they were
team.
trying to avoid getting caught. Like,
yeah, I'm sure no one on the team wanted the lawsuit.
Nobody wanted to pay $2.4 million.
It's kind of. I wish that it went to trial because there would be another court case with that would give some precedent to copyright in terms of emulating. Back in the day when Nintendo released the NES, they tried to make it so that you had to go through them to release a game for the system. They were trying to avoid the shovelware of the Atari 2600. And some people made bootleg NES games, and they sued them. And it was determined that no, you're allowed to make bootleg NES games. So then when the Game Boy came out, they decided to try and hijack copyright law to get around the fact that there was this previous court case allowing companies to make games for their systems. So in the BIOS of the Game Boy, it looks for the logo in every single game that's released for the Game Boy. It as the boot thing. You know, when you turn the Game Boy on, the logo comes down and goes ding. That was built into the game as a checksum to make sure that it was a legal game. And Nintendo's theory was, well, if it's a bootleg game and they have that Nintendo logo, well, then they're at least trademark. Sorry, I said copyright earlier. I meant trademark.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it's kind of like how for some reason, stealing the intellectual property is still illegal, but for some reason, companies go out of their way to make fake logos that don't technically say Aniplex, right? As a way of, for some reason, protecting themselves. I'm guessing that this in
It's
here is a fine, and this is jail time. I'm guessing. I don't know. Like it for whatever reason. It's fraud or something. Like at a certain degree, it ticks it above that level. That means
yeah.
like, nah, don't do it. Now there
Well,
are 1-to-1 bootlegs. Just so we're clear, like the whole purpose of me doing the bootleg series is to eventually expose that shit, of which it
yeah.
is rampant, right?
So I
But
use the term bootleg. Sorry, in this context, the the cool 2T is correct. I meant like third party unlicensed games, not
correct.
necessarily bootlegging like an official game. That would be copyright infringement. These are
But also
people
the
trying to make
point
their own
is,
games.
so Nintendo is attempting to, in this scenario you're describing, Nintendo is attempting to gatekeep what is accessed on their platform, right?
Yes.
And so their thought process is, if you bootleg, literally take our logo and put it into your game to bypass the thing we put in there to stop you from being able to do it, we have grounds to say that you are committing fraud because you are making it look like we endorsed you by putting our logo in there. In reality, you're just trying to circumvent the fact that we forced you to put it in there in order to get in. But that's our check and balance to make sure that nothing gets by us.
Yeah, to be super technical, not fraud, trademark infringement. But anyway, but yes, you get the idea.
Yeah.
However, someone sued, or they sued when whatever. It got to a court, and a court decided that actually no, Nintendo does not get to use trademark law to circumvent the fact that people can make games for their systems. Because Nintendo was using the logo as a functional aspect of loading games into the system, trademark did not apply. So people were allowed to add the Nintendo logo to their games so that their game could run on Game Boy, even though it wasn't an official Nintendo game. Now, the reason I bring that up is because Nintendo's argument for why Yuzu isn't legally allowed, from my understanding, I haven't read the lawsuit, but I've just read the news stories. But my understanding is they say, like we read earlier, that there's no way to use Yuzu legally. The classic emulators would all just try and make a program that could run the game. But eventually, platform developers got smart and they added in these encryption keys because the Digital Millennium Copyright Act says that you cannot circumvent the encryption of a software.
So the reason that they have legs in this lawsuit, whereas they haven't in previous ones, is because they're like, gotcha, encryption, de-encrypted, all right, bulletproof, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's also like the idea of fair use and all this shit, but it's never been litigated. And it's this idea of, if it's never litigated, we never know, and therefore it will stop a certain amount of people from even attempting because there's the risk that potentially it could come down on them, right? So it was kind of in their benefit to not ever actually litigate it. But with their games leaking constantly, in their eyes, they're out millions of dollars because their biggest games are leaking a week or two early. They finally said, I guess it's time, and then they folded. So within a day, which is I mean, I wouldn't want to be on the hook for the lawsuit, especially after the Gary Bowser thing. Although that was a little bit different. He was actually running a pirate website where they were actually giving away the games. Yuzu is just an emulator. But in order to use Yuzu, you have to get your encryption key from the system. And the idea was, well, if you get the encryption key yourself, and if Yuzu never supplies an encryption key, then that's fine. There's parts of the DMCA that allow you as a person to crack software that you own personally, in order to archive it. So there's this idea that, well, you can
That's what they were
get your
saying before.
own.
Like you can decompile your game yourself. You just can't download them.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
like
that's
buying a CD and ripping it onto your iTunes versus downloading the music.
yeah. There's also the aspect of downloading the game, right, and dumping the game from an actual cartridge onto a system or onto a computer and then playing it. But then what the encryption thing? Well, the games also have encryption, but the encryption key that you need is on your system. It's built into your system, and you need to dump that from the system. And anyway, long story short, it would have been good for this to go to trial and Nintendo get smacked in the face by a good, although there's always risk that you get a bad trial judge and bad law gets created, but it would have been good if they opened up the door a little bit, because the whole thing, from my point of view, had, like, Nintendo did not have standing to sue. But when Goliath walks up to David, you have to have a strong leg to not run away. Good for us, bad for Yuzu. You never want to be in this case. Yeah, I mean, it's expensive, but I mean, they had $2.4 million to pay them. So, I mean, unless they're just gonna, on paper give them the 2.4 and then declare bankruptcy, I don't know. Now, if they did try and test the waters and go to court and then lose as they're appealing up to try and get a more sympathetic judge, interest is accruing on whatever they owe, and then the damages just get bigger and bigger. But also, what is it worth for people to have emulators? Someone, if Nintendo wanted to just sue everyone, and knowing that they'll fold, and whether or not they get a payday or not, their goal is to at least shut down the software, then there is effectively a ban on emulators, even though there's legally no problem with it. It's just that, like what I was saying earlier, if it's never tested in court, like what we know now is legal for emulators doesn't apply anymore because of the encryption thing, technically. But then there's also other technicalities that would say it's allowed, but that needs to be tested in court. And the longer it isn't tested in court, then the longer Nintendo can just arbitrarily sue people in hope that they bully them out of the market.